It's NFL Wildcard Weekend, and we've got everything you need to know for the weekend ahead, picks, injuries, and so much more. Plus, we fill all the current NFL head coaching vacancies, so front offices don't have to. It's time to huddle. Let's go. What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Huddle. That's right, it is Wildcard Weekend. Ninja here with Tony. Tony, before we get into a obviously football-heavy show here, when you look at that NFC side of things, as Niners fans, what do you think? What do you make of it? I feel like we've got a pretty clear path to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I say the Niners got a really good path. That bye, as we've talked about, is absolutely huge. And one of the things I was thinking about recently is if we get chalk in the first two games of the weekend, right? If the Rams win their game, we're going to end up in a situation where the Niners will be playing the winner of the Eagles-Bucks game on short rest because they're going to be playing on Monday night. So I think the Niners are probably rooting for that situation where we get chalk in those first two games. And then they got a team on 6 days rest, assuming that game's on Sunday, after they've been rested for 2 full weeks. So I think things are shaking up for them. I think the team that the Niners need to watch out for in the NFC, team that gives me a little concern, would be the Lions, just because of that offensive line. I wouldn't power rank the Lions as my second best team, but just from a matchup perspective, that's the team that I think would give Kyle Shanahan and the Niners a little less sleep before that game.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. The Rams sort of hovering around there as well sort of give me pause. Just as, NFC West rival, we've seen some matchups there in the past. But anyway, we'll get into everything you need to know ahead of Wildcard Weekend. We got some picks at the bottom, so stay tuned for that. But Tony, is there anything different about the NFL postseason that bettors should know? Or are there any tips out there that bettors need to be mindful of moving into this week?
Yeah, certainly. When I'm doing my handicapping, I give a little more credence to home field advantage just because those crowds are going to be a little bit more raucous, especially at a place like Detroit, right, where they haven't had a playoff game in a while. You can expect that the impact that those fans are going to have on that game, false starts on the other team's offensive line, things like that. I give a little bit more weight to that. So we've talked on this show, I believe, about how home field advantage isn't really 3 points, that's a myth, but we give a little bit more credence to it for the playoffs. The other thing is when I do my handicapping and I come up with my numbers, there's a human element that isn't in the math that needs to be taken into consideration. And that's the case during the regular season as well, right? Like your numbers may say the line is 3 from Vegas, but I think the line should be 6. That's not an automatic bet even during the regular season. You also have to sprinkle in, things that can't be quantified. And those things that can't be quantified, you have to consider even more in the playoffs. Like a really good example of this would be last year, Bucks, Cowboys. Remember that game in the playoffs, Tom Brady? The numbers, I think most handicappers would agree, the Cowboys, are a better team here. But a lot of sharp bettors and a lot of people out there were saying, you know what, I'm actually going to bet the Bucks because of the Tom Brady factor, right? The Tom Brady, how do you quantify that? A guy that's got all this postseason experience, a guy like that. Situations where you've got a rookie quarterback, like in Houston with C.J. Stroud, you've got to consider that. He's never played in a postseason game. By the way, with Stroud, I'm not too worried about him because he looked really good in a postseason-like situation, week 18. But those are the types of things that you've got to take into. How young is a team? A team where you got a defense and nobody on that defense has ever played in a postseason game. Things like that you can't quantify, give a little bit more credence to in the postseason.
Yeah, great. 2 great points there at the end. One about CJ coming off that. It basically was a playoff game against the Colts there in the final regular season week. And then about youth, and I'm going to get to that. That's one of the elements of my capping for one of the matchups here coming up this weekend. Another thing I'll throw out there, because there is a couple of games on the board this weekend that I believe will be impacted by weather. So the temperatures drop. Snow gets in the mix here in January in a lot of those NFL markets. So keep an eye on that, and we're going to highlight a couple of those as we go. But weather definitely a factor in the playoffs.
Good point, Andrew. I'll throw one more out there. Bad offensive lines, I like to fade them on the road, and that's especially true in the playoffs too, as well, just because of that crowd situation.
You interrupted my My terrible impression of Jim Mora with that famous playoffs quote there back with the Colts.
You kidding me? Playoffs?
I love that one. With that in mind, and I'm not an impressionist here. With that in mind, do you have like favorite sort of NFL or sports in general, I guess, sort of sound bites or quotes like that famous Jim Mora bit? What year was that anyway? What year was that Jim Mora quote from?
I have no clue. I feel like I was like 15 or 14 years old. So like 15-ish years ago. Man, it was a while ago. But that is an all-time classic. I think that's got to go on the Mount Rushmore of sound bites.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
It's timeless, as we just witnessed with my terrible impression of Jim Mora. Do you have any favorites that are in the memory bank there?
Well, now that I know that Mount Rushmore has 4 faces on it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Call back to a prior show. I got to go with Allen Iverson's Practice. Yeah. Man, we talking about practice. That's absolutely classic. Dennis Green, they are who we thought they were.
Yeah.
That was very good. And then Pedro Martinez has got a couple. He's got the wake up the Bambino, I'll drill him in the ass comments. And then, the Yankees daddy comment as well. So Pedro was always good for a good soundbite too. So I'm sure I'm forgetting some, man. There's in all of sports, there's been so many, but any that I missed that are on your list?
I'll rattle off a few. And Steve just got in my ear here. That Jim Mora quote, November of 2001.
Wow. Yeah. So yeah. Wow. A little later than I thought.
I got a few for you. So one that pops to mind, one that I absolutely love was fitting that it's the wild card show. It was wild card at Lambeau. Matt Hasselbeck going out to the coin toss going out for the overtime coin toss. And what did he say? We're going to get the ball and we'll take the ball. We're going to score. And then he throws a pick six to, I don't know who it was, Al Harris maybe.
He sure did throw a touchdown there, didn't he?
He sure did. Another one that I love is, this is going way back, Shannon Sharp on the Broncos, and it's a famous like NFL Films clip where they are beating the New England Patriots, and he goes to one of those phones that's on the sidelines, and he says, call the president, get the National Guard in here because we're beating the Patriots so bad, is a favorite one.
That's a good one.
And then I'm going to cheat here for my third, but there's a clip on YouTube about Dan Marino, and he's filming a commercial, and it's for like a contest to go meet Dan Marino or whatever it is. And I'm going to swear here, so Steve, apologies, because you're going to have to bring the bleep button out. But he's trying a couple of takes, and at the end he says, "F it, send it in." And then the director or someone says, "Do you want to see a clip of that?" And he says, "Nope, I don't want to see shit." I love that soundbite. It's one of my favorites as well.
That's so good. Andrew, you're helping me think outside the box, because when you first said soundbite, I'm like, press conference. I'm not thinking about commercials, things on the field. That's a really good point. When you said the NFL Films one, who is it? Who's the defensive player? We're going to be here all day, baby.
I can't remember that one.
Oh, man, it's a really famous line. They always show it like on those sound bites. I'm trying to remember who it is. It's going to come to me right after the show, but that's a classic as well. I like the Hasselbeck coin toss one too, man.
It's an absolute gem, man.
Oh my gosh. And I feel like if that was in the era of like Twitter and stuff, it would have blown up and gone even more viral. And even like non-sports fans would have appreciated it as like, wow, that's a tough move there, Matt.
He'd be absolutely roasted, instantly, both hilarious, and then I felt kind of bad for old Hasselbeck in that one. Any sort of, as we're sitting here digging into the memory vault, any sort of favorite wildcard weekend games?
Oh my goodness. Was the Terrell Owens Packers game, the catch 2 they call it, was that a wild card game? I think it was, or was it divisional round?
That's a good shout. I can't remember specifically, but that's definitely a good one. Yeah.
That would be a classic one. That's the one that comes to mind immediately for me. How about yourself?
The one for me, and I'm pretty sure it's wild card, was that, and this is going way back. I'm aging myself with this one, but it was Oilers. That's how far we're going back. Oilers Bills. When I think the Oilers were up 35. The Frank Reich game.
Oh,
35-3 at halftime, and then they came back and won. Absolute madness in that one. Do you remember that game?
oh, barely, vaguely. Yeah, that's and that game is folklore now. So
Yeah.
I've gone back and watched it. As an adult, a true sports fan. Just it's like, how did it happen? Like how in the world did that take place? Such a classic.
You'd have just been a young buck for that one. But let's look ahead
Yeah.
to this weekend here and the playoffs in general. And I want you to sort of power rank your top five. I know, like odds boards, it's Niners, Ravens, and we'll no doubt have those two at the top of our lists here. But what does your top five teams going into the playoffs look like?
Yeah, like you said, Niners, Ravens for sure, very deserved. 1 and 2 seeds. I'm gonna go Cowboys 3.
Whew.
Bills 4
Yeah.
with all that momentum, and then Lions I'm going to give the 5th spot to. If someone wanted to argue with me and throw the Rams in here because of that momentum, I think they've won 7 of their last 8. They look really good. I couldn't argue with that. I could also see room for throwing the Chiefs in here just based off of their playoff experience, and you've always got to worry about them and the Chiefs. But these rankings are really based a lot on that momentum factor and who scares me the most right now.
I'm going to go, we're very similar for the most part here. I'm going Ravens 1 purely on the strength that the Ravens had that big win against the Niners. And I know the Niners are the favorites for the Super Bowl I don't know. I've not seen them not be top of the odds board, but I'll go Ravens 1. I'll go Niners 2, of course. Bills 3 for me. I got Cowboys 4. And Cowboys, a lot of people just sort of, sour on the Cowboys, and potentially deservedly so. But like when you look at them, man, like best point diff in the NFC, second best in the league. They protect the ball, they don't turn it over, and one of the top turnover margins per game in the league as well. And then number 5, Tony, I had to because they've been friend of the show since the beginning. I'm going CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans at number 5. I think they've got a winnable home game this weekend. Great point you had earlier talking about that. They're coming off a playoff game, so they've cut their teeth already against the Colts. So for the hell of it, I'm going Texans at number 5. Another thing to consider. I
like it because I've got that big futures ticket on the Texans.
I know you do.
So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. They're not quite in my top 5 yet, but I hope you're right on that one. I like it.
Sacrilege to not have the Huddle darlings, the Houston Texans, not in your top 5, but I'll throw them in there. Another thing to consider here, Tony, the NFL season is long. It is grueling. No team goes into the postseason 100% healthy. So talk about some of the biggest injuries that the folks at home should keep an eye on when doing their capping and going into that wild card weekend.
Let's start right off the bat with those Texans. They've got 2 big injuries at wideout. With those injuries, they've had Xavier Hutchinson and John Mechie starting at wide receiver. These guys have a combined 24 catches all year long. So that's not an ideal wide receiver 2 situation. Would love to see them get back Robert Woods or Noah Brown. Those 2 guys are capable. Noah Brown had 2 games this year of 150 plus yards. He'd be huge to get back. Unfortunately, both of those guys didn't practice yesterday. So I'm keeping an eye on the practice reports. As a Texans backer, very much rooting for those guys to be in there because that would be an enormous upgrade at the wide receiver 2 position. And Robert Woods isn't like, a super prolific wide receiver, but don't sleep on him. He's had some good postseason games. This guy's got a Super Bowl ring, even though he didn't play in the postseason that year. He's got a lot of playoff experience, and I think he'd be really valuable to have back as well. And then with the Texans too, Jonathan Grenard, their best pass rusher, arguably, with Will Anderson. Those 2 guys, Anderson and Grenard, big upgrade to the Texans if they're playing in this game. Dolphins had 19 guys on their injury report last week.
Decimated.
They're very banged up. Unbelievable. Couple guys I'm looking for or that you should know about. Van Ginkel and Jerome Baker, both linebackers are out. We talk about how important injuries are in the NFL, but cluster injuries are an even bigger red flag. So a little scary for the Dolphins here having 2 injuries at the same position. Waddle and Mostert didn't play last week in an important game. So that tells you those injuries are pretty legitimate, but they were limited in practice Friday of last week. And so far they're limited in practice as of yesterday. So I'd say they're like closer to playing than not, but certainly want to keep an eye on the practice report because the impact of those two guys in that offense is absolutely huge. Xavier Howard didn't practice yesterday. It's looking like he's probably not going to play this week. Outside chance he could, but Dolphins fans aren't super optimistic that he'll be in there. Steelers, TJ Watt's out. 1-10 all time without TJ Watt are the Steelers. And so that's obviously a big one to be aware of. Amari Cooper and Myles Garrett both sat last weekend. That's looking like more of a rest situation. They just wanted to get him a little more rest, and maybe they could have gone last week. But once again, want to keep an eye on the practice reports for them. Gabe Davis, the Bills' deep threat at wide receiver. He's got a PCL injury, so no clue whether he's going to play or not, but that's an important one as well. A.J. Dillon and Christian Watson for the Packers, two big pieces of their offense. If Dillon's out, Aaron Jones can carry the load, but Christian Watson really stretches defenses. He's that deep threat on the Packers that loves to take deep chances with and just chuck it up to him. So if he's not there, that could be big for the Packers. Stephon Gilmore was in a sling last week after the game for the Cowboys. Cowboys fans had to be cringing, worried about that. He told reporters he thinks he's going to go. It looks like he got good news on the MRI. Sam Laporta out for the Lions. He's not going to play. Their tight end. Dan Campbell's got some heat this week for leaving Laporta in the game when he could have taken him out and rested him. That's a big miss for them on offense, a big part of their offensive attack. And then lastly, the Eagles. Darius Slay hasn't played in 4 weeks. Their cornerback, their best cornerback. He could be back. I think that would be an emotional lift for the Eagles to have that leader back, and maybe a big reason why we've seen them struggle so much over the last couple weeks. And then lastly, with the Eagles, A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith are banged up. I think they're both going to play, but that's not certain. And then the finger on Jalen Hurts' throwing hand, that's not good when your starting quarterback bangs his finger on the throwing hand. So he's obviously going to play. We all know he's going to play, but is he going to be 100%? Certainly worth keeping an eye on. Yeah,
definitely. Good list. And some absolutely, great players in that list as well. So we're recording this on a Wednesday morning. So like Tony alluded to, keep your eyes on those practice rosters. See whose names are included and left out and statuses and all of that kind of stuff. One thing that was sort of a meme throughout the regular season was, and past few seasons, I guess, but is the NFL scriptwriters. And if you didn't believe it, how do you not believe that this league doesn't have scriptwriters with some of the matchups we've got here? We've got the Deshaun Watson, CJ Stroud Bowl with the Browns at the Texans. We've got Matt Stafford and Jared Goff Bowl with the Rams against the Lions. The Mike McCarthy Bowl. We've got Tyreek back to Arrowhead. Is there anything I'm missing here from this wildcard board? This is insane.
It's a great lineup. Unfortunately, the scriptwriters couldn't keep Deshaun Watson healthy, so we could have a true revenge game there. But you're right. It's wild. We talked about it a couple weeks ago when we sort of saw this, and everybody did, this Rams-Lions situation on the horizon. But I'll say it again. How about the Ravens and Browns meeting in the future in the playoffs? That could be a fun situation. And as I look down the road, there's a lot of variations of Super Bowl rematches, right?
Yep.
We could see theoretically 49ers Chiefs Super Bowl rematch. We could see a Chiefs Eagles Super Bowl rematch. Going way back, and this is a little less likely, but we could see a Steelers Cowboys rematch. And so there's a lot of variations of those that's always fun when a team loses to another team in the Super Bowl and a couple years later gets a chance to kind of avenge that loss. So A+ to the scriptwriters on this one this season.
Hey man, if I'm a scriptwriter, I'm hoping for a Ravens 49ers rematch, have the power go out again, but then give us the dub in that Super Bowl, man.
Why do you got to bring that up, man? That's a tough one to swallow. Andrew, what was a tougher loss for you as a 49ers fan? I've been wanting to ask you this for a while. That loss in the Super Bowl, the Seahawks Richard Sherman NFC Championship game interception, right? Or the Chiefs Super Bowl. And I'm going to even throw a fourth one in there for you. How about the Giants? Oh, why can't I think of the Niners punt returner's name? Kyle Williams. The Kyle Williams fumble against the Giants in that was the championship game. Yeah. Those four, which one stung you?
Okay, so I got to say two stand out for me as far as a sting. The Chiefs-Niners Super Bowl, because we were watching that here at the office, and I was super confident about that game. I was talking a little smack throughout the game. I thought we had that won. But from a stinging perspective, and talking about sound bites in this episode earlier, it's the Richard Sherman one, because he talked so much smack about Crabtree at the end of the game. I just felt I wanted to curl up and sob after watching that game. So that was Steve had his finger ready on the button for that stupid Price is Right sound effect. That's the one for me that going back really, really sucked and really, really stung. But so did that Ravens-Niners game, man. That was the blemish on our perfect Super Bowl run, that game there. So that one hurts a little bit as well. What about you?
Yeah, my gut reaction is to say the Chiefs game, but I think there might be some recency bias there just because that was the most recent. That Ravens one, I had a big futures position on the Niners that year, and I didn't hedge it as I should have. And so from a gambling perspective, that one probably stung the most. Really good point on the soundbite from Richard Sherman, and you're stunned. Right, there's probably confetti falling and everybody's celebrating and you're stunned watching the game, and then Richard Sherman's talking trash in your face as a Niner fan. And I got to tell you, I don't know that Michael Crabtree was ever the same after that game. He had some decent seasons after that, but he was not the number one wide receiver Michael Crabtree that we all know. And so it almost seems like that was a turning point for his career. So yeah, Niners fans, man, I put those top four excruciating losses up against any other franchise's top four in the last 20, 30 years. We've had some tough ones.
Those are tough ones for sure. One thing before we move on a little bit, have you heard of this sort of Super Bowl branding color conspiracy like the past handful of seasons here?
Yeah, I think Aaron Rodgers, was he the first one to kind of bring that up on Pat McAfee? Is that where you heard it? Because that was the first time I heard of it.
I just saw it. It was either on Twitter or Reddit that I saw it. But for those that don't know what we're talking about, a couple years ago, Super Bowl, what was it, 56, I believe. The Super Bowl sort of sub-branding color palette was orange and yellow, and that one was, of course, Bengals and Rams. And then the next year was a sort of, it was sort of greenish and red, and then we had the Eagles and the Chiefs. But this year, Tony, do you know what the two main colors in that Super Bowl sub-brand are?
I saw that. It's red and purple, isn't it?
That's right. So get that Super Bowl exact matchup in, because Ravens are going up against our beloved 49ers. The scriptwriters will get it right. Trust me. I want to talk a little bit here about Super Bowl 50. What are we on? 57? Super Bowl 57 MVP. Super Bowl 58 MVP odds board. The usual suspects are near the top there with Lamar, with Brock Purdy, but sort of go a bit deeper here for me. Who jumps out with value? Certainly possibility. Who jumps out for you as a good candidate in that market?
Yeah, what I like to do with these, because we all know that the quarterbacks are way more likely to win these awards. So I like to take a quarterback on a team that's not in people's top 5 of the power rankings, right? Or a position player on a team like the Ravens or 49ers that are expected to be in the Super Bowl. So in that vein, look at the 49ers, a guy like Brandon Ayuk or George Kittle at 55-1 presents a lot of value. But I really like Deebo Samuel at 30-1. Isn't Deebo due for one of those takeover games where he's got 110 yards rushing and 95 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns or something like that? We've seen him have some dominant put this team on my back playoff performances in the past, and I think he's due for a game like that. So really intrigued by him at 30-1. Stafford, I believe, was 60-1 in that range, and so that was pretty intriguing as well. Figure a team like that could get really hot and has been hot lately. Gotta love the starting quarterback for a team like that. How about yourself? Anybody stand out for you on there?
I mean, my big reach would be CJ at around plus 4,500. I mean, you gotta love the job that D'Amico Ryans and that whole team has put together. Like you said, though, some injury concerns going into that game against Cleveland, but loves CJ at that value. But then how about this one way further down? Zay Flowers at 80 to 1.
I like it. He's a deep threat. He's a guy that if he catches, say, a 65-yard touchdown from Lamar and a 52-yard touchdown from Lamar, which is a game that he could easily have, you could see that happening. Of course, the scary thing with wide receivers is, when they get prolific stats, so does the quarterback, and the quarterback's most likely to get it. But at that value, I see your point there. How about, I'm going to go even deeper than you. How about this? How about Raheem Mostert, 200 to 1? Waddle and Mostert are both 200 to 1 for Miami. By the way, Steve, our sound effects guy, is a Dolphins fan, so that's why I'm pretty sure that's why we're
hammering
getting that
button.
Effect.
Hammering that button.
And how about Puka Nacua at Nacua at 200
Love that
to 1?
Yep,
that's a nice deep one as well.
Love that one for sure. Nacua, I mean, one of the most pleasant surprises, of course, like incredible box scores week in, week out. But looking back at that regular season, I want you to give me a team and a player that from a fan, a hardcore NFL observer or a bettor that were disappointing for you during the 2023 regular season.
Yeah, let's start with as a bettor. I had some positions on Aaron Rodgers for MVP. How bad does that look right now? And not only that, I thought the Jets could actually contend for the AFC East. And that defense was just so good. They had, offensive and defensive rookie of the years on that team. There was just, I love Robert Saleh. I had so much hope for the Jets. And so that one was pretty tough. Another one, I mean, how about the Bengals? I think when a lot of people were projecting their playoff teams for this year in the preseason, the Bengals were like a lock. It was like, oh yeah, got to pencil the Bengals in. And obviously, losing Burrow hurts them tremendously. They had some other injuries and some other issues on that team. But why was the defense so bad in Cincinnati? I mean, that was problematic as well. Lou Amaruno, he was a guy that people were looking at as a head coaching candidate last year because that defense looked so good. And this year, the defense in certain games was really, really bad. So got to throw the Bengals on that disappointing list too.
Yeah, I'll add Washington. I mean, I was hyped about Howell. I was hyped about them adding Bieniemy to the mix. McLaurin, Dotson, and Samuel at wide receiver. I thought this was going to be a fun, exciting team on the rise. And I mean, after that 2-0 start, we sort of thought that they were there. But then the wheels fell off real quick. I remember that Week 3 game against Buffalo, and that's the Washington that we got. I mean, they got hammered, and the rest of the season was a wrap after that. And then disappointing.
I would say the Chargers, but we're used to them being disappointing, aren't we?
Well, we are, and that brings me to my disappointing player. I'm gonna talk about Quentin Johnston here. This was the second receiver, I believe, drafted off the board in 2023. Goes to a team ready-made on offense, a sort of borderline, if not elite quarterback there under center. 38 catches, 430 yards, I think, on the season and a pair of touchdowns, but some awful drops. So I'll toss his name out there for most disappointing player. And I know it's a rookie, so rookie campaign, sure, but as number 2 off the board there at that position, kind of a tough go for him.
No, I agree. And I actually liked him for Rookie of the Year candidate just because of what you said of that position that he was in. He had a couple really good wide receivers ahead of him that he could learn from, but they were also hurt all the time. And so you're like, oh, there's a path for this guy to be Rookie of the Year. And his season couldn't have gone much worse. That's a really good one.
I want to get into our picks here real quick because I can't wait to dig into these wildcard games all weekend long. But obviously, with the end of regular season comes some coach firings, unfortunately, for a lot of those guys out there. So as of this recording, and there still are some names that might get fired here as we're sitting here recording this, but as of this recording, We've got 6 vacancies in the NFL. So Panthers, Raiders, and Chargers all fired coaches mid-season. Falcons, Commanders, and Tony, I don't know how you feel about this, but shockingly, the Titans, who fired Mike Vrabel yesterday, all have openings. So let me get your thoughts on that Vrabel firing, and the other two, if you're so inclined. But I think we all knew that those two teams, the Falcons and the Commanders, would take action real quick. So talk to me about Vrabel, and then maybe fill some of those positions with some of those candidates that are out there.
Yeah, the Vrabel firing was pretty surprising. You and I were in a production meeting and heard right around the same time about that, and your jaw literally dropped. You were like, I don't know if you know this, but you were like, oh, like it was pretty stunning. And this is a guy who I said on our last show or 2 weeks ago that I think he's a top 5, top 10 coach in the league, and I still feel that way. In terms of game management, certainly a great motivator, the X's and O's. I mean, this guy is quality. And I think the reason why this move is so surprising is you're kind of like, who can the Titans get to upgrade here? You know, unless they've got some inside information that we don't know, that like Belichick or a Harbaugh or someone like that is interested in that position. It's like, it's a risky move to potentially downgrade, to get rid of Vrabel with the hopes of getting one of those big names and having to settle for like a current defensive coordinator with no coaching experience. So that one was pretty surprising for me. In terms of slotting guys in, it's tough to do this time of year, but I'm going to give it my best shot here. In terms of the Titans vacancy, how about Eric Bieniemy coming over? This guy's long overdue. We've talked about him a bunch on this show. Long overdue for a head coaching opportunity. I could see him sliding in well in Tennessee. The Falcons, I've got a good one here for you. Steve Wilks, defensive coordinator for the 49ers. Now, this guy has like active litigation. He's part of that Brian Flores lawsuit for racial discrimination. And one of the teams in that racial discrimination is the Panthers. How would he love to go to that division and play the Panthers twice a year, knowing that he despises that franchise enough to literally sue them? That would have to feel good to play them and beat them twice a year. Chargers, Bill Belichick. I could see the cupboard. You got a good quarterback. We know Bill has been drooling for a good quarterback ever since he lost Tom Brady. I would love to see him in Los Angeles, because this Chargers team struggles with losing close games, right? And say what you want about Belichick, maybe he's lost a step, etc. When he's in a close game, 3-point game, I've got faith in that team. Furthermore, the defense for the Chargers the last couple of years has really been a problem, and Bill Belichick is someone that could absolutely fix that defense. Would love to see that. Panthers, let's get Ben Johnson in there. Ben Johnson's probably the biggest offensive mind, potential genius guru candidate. We might be calling him that in the future. And if Bryce Young can't do something with Ben Johnson calling plays, then it's time to start worrying about Bryce Young. I'm already starting to worry about Bryce Young a little bit, by the way. And then last open position right now, and I'm with you. I think there's going to be more. Adam Schefter said probably about 10 by the end of the season. So there could be a few more. But Commanders, Jim Harbaugh, coming from Michigan with that national title. Harbaugh is someone who I think he needs a GM and an owner who isn't like an alpha. You know, these two personalities are going to clash like we saw in San Francisco. And everything that I'm seeing from this Josh Harris guy, just based off of the impression that I get from him, he seems like an easygoing, I don't want to say submissive, but like an easygoing guy that could allow Harbaugh to take those alpha reins, and Harbaugh would be able to work with in Washington. I could see that.
I love it. I love what you just put out there. Some really, really good scenarios there. And we talked about the potential of Vrabel filling in the void if Belichick were to leave. I mean, all indications are that he's done. But Vrabel up in New England would be amazing. Not keen on the Niners losing another DC, but it is what it is. What have you heard? I saw some rumblings that the Bears position, head coaching position, is going to be safe. Have you sort of seen the same thing there?
Yeah, I think I'm reading what you're reading. I don't have any inside knowledge there, but I feel like, I mean, don't you kind of feel like they would have fired him by now? These teams are getting so quick. Like we saw Ron Rivera like the next day, you know?
Yeah.
And so what is there to think about with the Bears? I think that would have happened by now. So if I had to bet right now, I'd say Eberflus's job is safe, but that remains to be seen.
I would agree. And let's be honest, you were high on the Bears in the last few weeks, and deservedly so. They got better as the season progressed. That team as a whole, the defensive unit, Justin Fields, they improved throughout the season. So I think you're right. I think that position is safe for now. And it'll be interesting to see what the Bears do in the draft coming up in the offseason. But we're miles away from that. Let's talk about the weekend ahead here, Tony. We've got 3 picks each. I haven't done the math, but I think we're on a bit of a roll here. I think I'm 7-2 in the last 3 shows. Of course, a big L backing the Washington Huskies in the Natty Champ game. But I digress. But get us started here for the NFL weekend ahead. What's caught your eye?
Well, we've talked about the Texans a little bit earlier. I like the Texans on the money line here. I think they're a live dog. I always get a little nervous when I see everybody else on the Texans as well. So I kind of wish I was a little more contrarian on this one. But the Browns defense is way worse on the road. I believe the Browns have only won one road game this year, which is not good. Maybe 2. But they're way worse on the road. All their metrics and analytics for that defense, way worse on the road, and they're going to be playing in front of a pretty rabid home crowd here for the Texans. CJ Stroud, this guy's elite. CJ Stroud is elite. I think he's better than Trevor Lawrence. I think that he is someone that we're going to appreciate a lot more in the next couple of years. He's making these no-name wide receivers look like superstars, and as we said in the show, he proved in Week 18 he's going to be just fine under pressure. So like that. And as I also said earlier in the show, the Browns, I don't like offensive lines that are bad on the road. The Browns do not have a good offensive line. I think we're used to the Browns having a good offensive line. As we've seen the last couple seasons, they usually do. But they've had some injuries there, and they're not that great up front. And so I think we could start to see some cracks in the foundation for this Browns team on the road this week.
And I think the Flacco smoke and mirrors comes to an end as well. I love that play. Ballsy play, Texans on the money line. Sort of in the same game here, but anytime touchdown markets, I'm going Dalton Schultz, anytime touchdown at plus 210. Just a couple games ago, this guy had 8 catches from 11 targets for 61 yards against Cleveland. One of his best games. And that was a largely Davis Mills game. So CJ is going to be ready, and he's going to be looking at this guy. And like Tony mentioned, we know about Cleveland's home road splits on the defensive side of the ball. Home teams have put up some big numbers when the Browns come to town, so don't be surprised to see Houston put up some points here in this one. And then really, it's just a matter of principle. The Texans have been the official team of the Huddle since basically episode 1. We've been high on this team. We've been high on CJ. We've been high on D'Amico Ryans. So now that we've watched them get to the playoffs, I'm high on Dalton Schultz to cash an anytime tutty. What do you got next?
That might be the pick of yours that is my most favorite that you've had all throughout this show. I love that Dalton Schultz one, and especially if those 2 wide receivers who I mentioned earlier in the show, Noah Brown and Robert Woods, if they're out, the volume's got to go somewhere. And really good point from you about the prior game that he had against them where he went off. Love that pick. For me next, I've got a 2-team 6-point teaser here for you. Eagles. The Bucks over the Eagles. We're going to tease that up to 8.5, and then we're going to tease the Texans up to 8.5. So we're going through the key numbers of 3 and 7, which I always talk about is so important, and you're just getting a nice buffer here. What I also like about this, these 2 teams, the Texans and Bucks, are built for a backdoor cover, right? In Tampa Bay, you've got Godwin and you've got Evans. If the Bucks do find themselves in trouble, down 12 points, down 13 points in the fourth quarter, and they've got the ball, you feel really good about their ability to come back. And I would say the same thing about the Texans with Stroud. So that feels like a really safe, secure teaser, but they call them teasers for a reason. But I like that one a lot this week.
Love that. It feels like it's been weeks and weeks since you've last had a teaser here on the Huddle, but glad that you're back in the mix here. Everything sort of feels normal once again. I'm looking at that Packers trip to Big D at Dallas. Cowboys sort of minus 7.5 point faves here, but I'm taking the Cowboys here. against the spread. Dallas already brings the highest scoring offense in the league into this one, but at home, they are 7.5 points better, averaging 37.4 per game. And at 6-2 ATS at Jerry World, one of the best home bets in the league all regular season. And Tony alluded to this earlier. So now, in come the Packers, who since the 1970 merger are the fourth youngest team to make the playoffs. That's not nothing. Sure, they've found their QB, and it's a nice feather in their cap that they made the playoffs. But that inexperience and that lack of a veteran presence is going to be glaring against a team like this at home. Packers on the road, 4-5 ATS this season, but losses at Denver, Vegas, Atlanta, Pittsburgh, the Giants, and just a 3-point win at Carolina don't look great for this playoff team. Dallas by $1 million here. They are largely healthy, though a couple of questionables on the interior O-line. But give me the Cowboys here in this one.
I like it. I've got another teaser for you, this time a 2-team 7-point teaser. Before I tell you the pick, a quick reminder, always shop around for teasers because you can get very different teaser prices at different establishments. So if you got multiple books, which you should, always shop around. 7-point teaser, Rams teased up to 10.5. That feels really safe with those wide receivers and that quarterback. Tough to picture them at least not coming in the back door on a 10.5-point teaser. And the Cowboys teased down from 7.5 just to a half point. There's no risk of a tie in the playoffs, obviously, so the Cowboys just have to win the game in this situation. Cowboys dominate at home, a really, really good team at home. And the Lions defense is just susceptible to getting torn up by Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. So that's another one that feels really safe and secure for me there.
I'll finish things off here. Dolphins at Chiefs. As we sit here, Chiefs favored by 4.5. The total has gone up a half point to 44.5 this morning. I'm going to go under 44 in this one. So keep an eye on the forecast for this game. It's supposed to be frigid with this game kicking off after sunset. Temperatures will be probably close to 0. Not conducive to good quarterback play with two good quarterbacks in the mix here. And Chiefs offense obviously hasn't been quite the same, but Arrowhead has been an under fortress this season. 8-1 to the under in 9 home games. The only over was that 41-10 win over the early season version of the Chicago Bears. And a lot of injuries for the Dolphins here to some big names. As of Wednesday morning, Mostert, Tyreek, Waddle, all questionable. Some questionables on the offensive line, not to mention the secondary. But really, the weather is going to be the major factor in this one. So give me the under 44.5 here in this game at Arrowhead.
I like it, Andrew. Can you give me one player, any position, any team this weekend that you think is going to go off, almost from a fantasy perspective? I'm in a couple leagues where it's basically a fantasy type setup. You got to pick players in different positions. So who would be that one guy that you think is going to go nuts?
So I'll cheat. I don't know. Nuts would be a bit of a bit of an exaggeration, but for a lot of the reasons that we've talked about already on the show, I think Dalton Schultz is primed to have a pretty big game here this weekend. I just had mentioned him for my anytime touchdown bet at plus 210. That looks really good to me. I think CeeDee Lamb might be in store for a massive game this weekend as well. Talked about the inexperience with that Packers team, and I think Dallas is going to light up the scoreboard, keep that scoreboard operator busy in that game, and CeeDee is going to be a big beneficiary of that. What about you?
I like it. I can't argue with those. I wonder about Tyreek Hill. You have some really good points. You know, the weather could be a factor and slow this game down a little bit. But even I could see him getting like a wide receiver bubble screen and running, 70 yards a couple times. So revenge game for him. I could see him really enjoying and relishing, a 160-yard 2-touchdown performance or something like that. I'm almost expecting him to just go off this weekend. We'll see.
Yeah, he's going to be extra motivated for that trip to Arrowhead against his old team, and he'll be licking his chops, man. And that team, that offense has struggled. The Chiefs offense has struggled without him mightily, and it's going to be a highlight. It could potentially be a highlight reel for him to showcase those skills that the Chiefs absolutely miss. What are your plans for the weekend? Hunker down in front of the. Are you going to have? I guess you don't need multiple screens up again, but. You just hunker down in front of the TV and watch everything?
Yeah, man, this is one of, I mean, if you count the national championship game, wild card weekend, this is one of my favorite weekends of the year, really. I mean, you got to put the Super Bowl up there. You got to put week 1 of the NFL season up there, March Madness, obviously. But somewhere in my top 5, probably, this wild card weekend is one of my favorites. It's just great entertainment. All the storylines we've talked about, I can't wait, man.
There's always some magic around wild card weekend. I sort of put it up there with, you know, the first couple days of March Madness. There's always something crazy that happens. There's always something, I'll use an old term, but talking around the water cooler, like there's always something that will have folks talking about what happened on the weekend. But whatever you folks do with your bets, best of luck. We thank you for watching, and we'll catch you all next week when we talk about the divisional round. Playoffs are here, baby. Let's enjoy it.